In a quiet valley surrounded by low green hills, there was a small village where mornings began with the ringing of a single church bell. The sound drifted through the fields, bounced off stone houses, and melted into the mist that rose from the earth. In that village lived a 5-year-old girl named Anna. She was small and light-footed, with chestnut hair that curled around her face and eyes as wide and curious as the morning sky. Anna didn't talk much. She didn't need to. She had something the grown-ups couldn't understand, a kind of peace that came from somewhere deeper than words. Every day, just as the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops, Anna would step outside her family's cottage with a little wicker basket in her hands. Inside were a few wildflowers she had picked the day before, daisies, lavender, and sometimes a bright red poppy if she could find one. She always walked alone. Her bare feet brushed against the cool grass still heavy with dew. She crossed the narrow dirt road that cut through the village and followed a small path that wound between meadows of tall grass and sleeping cattle. No one knew exactly when she started this routine, but every morning, without fail, Anna walked toward a lonely hill that rose just beyond the last field. At the top of that hill stood a weathered statue of the Virgin Mary, carved from pale stone that had turned soft gray from the passing years. Her hands were open in blessing, and her face looked gentle but tired, as if centuries of wind and rain had slowly worn down her features. No one in the village paid much attention to that statue anymore. It had stood there for generations, half forgotten and covered in moss. But to Anna, it was more than just stone. It was someone waiting, someone who listened. She would reach the top of the hill, set down her basket, and begin to brush away the fallen leaves around the Virgin's feet. Then she'd place her flowers in a small circle on the stone base and sit quietly before the statue. "Good morning, Mama Mary," she would whisper. Her voice was soft, but in the silence of the hills it carried like music. "I brought you flowers again. I picked the white ones because they remind me of your dress." Then she would talk about her mother baking bread, about her father fixing the fence, about her cat who refused to listen when she called. She spoke as though she were talking to a friend, not to stone, but to someone alive, someone who smiled when she arrived. Sometimes she stayed only a few minutes, sometimes an hour. She always ended her visit by folding her hands and saying, "Thank you for listening. I'll come back tomorrow." Then she would rise, pick up her basket, and walk back down the hill with her light steps, humming softly to herself. From the village below, people sometimes saw her small figure outlined against the morning sun, a tiny shadow kneeling before the statue, framed by the golden sky. To them, it looked strange. To Anna, it felt like home. As the days passed, the villagers began to notice her pattern. Every morning, like clockwork, the little girl would appear on the path, carrying her basket of flowers. At first, they smiled at her devotion. But soon, whispers began to spread, curious, harmless at first. "Where does that child go every day?" someone asked at the bakery. "She climbs to the old statue again," said another. "I saw her kneeling there in the cold." "Every single morning?" "Yes, even when it rains." A few chuckled, shaking their heads. "Children imagine saints when they're lonely," said one. "She probably thinks the statue talks to her," said another. But Anna didn't know about their laughter. She only knew that each time she reached the hill, something in her heart felt warm, as if the world itself paused to listen with her. One morning, while she was arranging her flowers, she thought she saw something new. The statue's face, usually gray and still, seemed softer in the light. The lips, which she had always imagined smiling, looked a little different now, curved, ever so slightly. She tilted her head, her little brow furrowed in thought. "Are you smiling?" she whispered. The wind rustled the oak leaves above her, and the sunlight shifted over the statue's face. To her, it looked as if the Virgin Mary was smiling indeed. She smiled back. "I knew you were happy to see me." And so, every morning, she returned, her steps steady, her faith stronger, her little heart unaware that soon, her simple walk to the hill would change the entire village. As the weeks went by, the people of the village grew used to seeing the little girl walking up the hill each morning. At first, they found it endearing, a child's innocent habit that would surely fade with time. But when summer passed into autumn and the fog began to settle heavy in the valleys, Anna was still walking that path, her small basket swinging at her side. Her mother often stood by the window, watching her disappear into the morning haze. "She'll catch a cold," she would sigh, drying her hands on her apron. Her father only shrugged. "Let her go," he said quietly. "She'll tire of it soon." But she didn't. Even on days when the wind bit at her cheeks or the rain soaked her dress, she walked the same way barefoot through the mud, a few wilted flowers clutched close to her chest. Each evening, she returned with that same far-off glow in her eyes, a peace that even her parents could not name. When the neighbors noticed, the whispers began again. Some spoke gently, others not so kindly. "She's only 5. What could she possibly understand? It's not natural for a child to talk to a statue every day. I heard she says the Virgin smiles at her." And then came the laughter, the kind that carries easily in a small town where everyone knows each other's voice. One morning, as Anna passed by the bakery, she heard 2 women talking near the doorway. "Look at her," one of them murmured. "Off again with her flowers." The other chuckled. "Maybe she thinks she's a saint." Anna lowered her eyes and kept walking. Her little hands held tighter around the basket, but she didn't turn back. When she reached the foot of the hill, she looked up through the mist. The outline of the Virgin Mary stood waiting, calm and unchanging, her arms open as always. And just like that, all the noise of the village fell away. She knelt before the statue, wiped the raindrops from its feet, and said softly, "Don't worry, Mama Mary. They just don't understand yet." Then she smiled, as if she could see an answer in the Virgin's stone eyes. At home that evening, her mother tried to reason with her. "Anna, you're too young to walk so far alone. The hill is slippery after the rain." Anna nodded politely, but her small voice carried a strange certainty. "I'm not alone, Mama. She walks with me." Her father chuckled uneasily. "You mean the Virgin. Anna, statues can't walk." But the child only smiled. "Maybe not for you, Papa." The words made both parents pause. They wanted to correct her, to tell her that faith belonged in church on Sundays, not in the muddy fields of the hills, but something in her calm expression stopped them. She was only 5, yet her eyes held the quiet conviction of someone who knew more than she could explain. That night, as the wind blew softly against the windows, Anna knelt beside her bed and whispered a prayer no one else heard. "Please bless Mama and Papa, and please help them see what I see." Outside, the hills lay silent under the moonlight. Down in the village, the laughter and doubts of the grown-ups filled the evening air, but high above, the statue on the hill caught a glimmer of starlight. Its face, worn and weathered, seemed to hold a new softness, as if it too was waiting for something. Something only a child could bring. Autumn deepened, and the air grew colder. The meadows that once shimmered gold were now pale and quiet under a blanket of fallen leaves. Still, every morning, Anna walked the same path to the hill, her little basket swinging, her steps steady as ever. The villagers had stopped trying to stop her. They simply watched from their windows or from the market square, whispering among themselves as the small figure disappeared into the mist. One afternoon, while the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the fields orange, a few of the older boys decided to play a cruel trick. "Let's follow her tomorrow," said one. "To the statue?" another asked, lowering his voice. "Yes, she says it smiles. Let's see if the stone smiles at us too." They laughed quietly, their voices echoing in the empty street. The next morning, before dawn, the boys crept behind her, hiding in the bushes along the narrow trail. They watched her small figure ahead of them, walking carefully over rocks and roots, humming a soft tune. When she reached the top of the hill, she knelt as always. She brushed away the leaves, arranged her flowers, and began to whisper her morning prayer. Her voice was faint but clear, the voice of a child speaking to someone she trusted completely. The boys crouched behind the oak, barely able to contain their giggles. "Look, she's talking to it," one whispered. "She's bowing to a rock," another snorted. But when Anna turned suddenly, as though she heard them, they ducked behind the tree. Her eyes searched the hill for a moment. Then she looked back at the statue and smiled.
"Don't worry, Mama Mary. They just don't see you yet."
The boys slipped away before she could notice them. By afternoon, their story had spread through every corner of the village. "She talks to it," one boy told the blacksmith. "She says the statue moves," shouted another. The laughter began again, louder this time, harsher. "She's pretending. She's trying to be special. Poor little thing, her imagination's gotten away from her." That evening, as Anna passed through the marketplace, she felt the stares following her. Some faces looked amused, others disapproving. Even those who meant no harm couldn't resist whispering behind their hands. "Do you think she really sees something?" "Nonsense. She's 5. Children see angels in clouds." "Then why hasn't the priest said anything?" Anna walked with her head bowed, clutching her basket tightly to her chest. When she reached home, her mother could see the tears she tried to hide. "What happened, my love?" she asked softly. "They don't believe me," Anna whispered. Her mother knelt beside her. "Believe you about what?" "That she smiles. The Virgin smiles at me." Her mother's heart ached. She didn't know how to answer. She wanted to tell her that everything would be all right, but she could feel the weight of the village's laughter pressing against their small house. The next day, word reached Father Tomas, the parish priest. He was a kind man with silver hair and calm eyes, known for never raising his voice. When the villagers told him about Anna, he listened quietly, folding his hands. "She says the statue smiles?" he asked. They nodded eagerly, expecting him to laugh as well. But instead, he said only, "Perhaps her faith is stronger than ours." The crowd murmured, uncertain how to respond. That evening, Father Tomas visited Anna's parents. He found them sitting by the fire, the little girl asleep in her chair, her hands still clutching the handle of her basket. "I've heard the stories," the priest said gently. "You must be troubled." Her father sighed. "We don't know what to think. She's only a child, but she's so certain." "Children often see what adults cannot," Father Tomas replied. He paused, his eyes resting on the sleeping girl. "I think I'll visit the hill myself. Tomorrow morning, quietly. Let's see this place where she prays." That night, the village seemed quieter than usual. The rain began softly, tapping on the rooftops, washing the dust from the paths. Through the window, the hill was barely visible in the darkness, but now and then, lightning flickered behind the clouds, illuminating its outline for just a moment. Father Tomas looked out from his small rectory, hands folded around his rosary. In the silence, he whispered, "Lord, grant me the heart of a child, so I may see what she sees." And somewhere up on the hill, under the cold rain and the whisper of the wind, the old stone statue stood as it always had, silent, waiting, and perhaps listening. The next morning came with a strange stillness. A silver fog hung low over the valley, wrapping the village in quiet. The church bell rang once, its echo swallowed by the mist. Father Tomas stood outside the chapel, his cloak drawn tight against the chill. Beside him waited Anna's parents, pale with worry. Behind them, a handful of curious villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. "Are we truly doing this?" one of them asked.
"Yes,"
said Father Tomas calmly, but not to mock her, only to see.
They began the climb as the first light broke through the clouds.
The ground was soft beneath their boots, and droplets of dew sparkled on the grass. No one spoke. The only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant song of a lark. Up ahead, through the fog, a tiny figure appeared, a little girl with a basket of flowers, walking barefoot along the same worn path. Even from far away, they could tell it was Anna. Her steps were small, but her pace was steady, as if she already knew every turn of the trail by heart. Now and then, she stopped to pick a new flower, adding it gently to her basket. When the villagers saw her do this, something inside them softened a quiet shame they couldn't yet name. "She really comes every day," one man whispered. Another nodded slowly. "Even in this weather?" They hid behind a cluster of trees near the top of the hill, close enough to see her, but far enough not to disturb her. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood where it always had, tall, worn by years of wind and rain, her face streaked with the green of moss. The oak tree beside her swayed lightly in the morning breeze. Anna reached the clearing, placed her basket on the ground, and knelt before the statue. She brushed away the damp leaves and arranged her flowers at the Virgin's feet. "Good morning, Mama Mary," she whispered, her voice clear in the still air. "I brought the yellow ones today. I thought you'd like them." The villagers watched in silence. Her parents exchanged uneasy glances. Father Tomas, standing behind them, folded his hands in prayer. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The hill remained quiet, ordinary, unchanged. One of the villagers shifted impatiently. "You see? She's only playing." Another sighed. "Let's go back." But Father Tomas raised his hand. "Wait." He could feel something not in his eyes, but deep within his chest. A kind of peace that pressed gently against the air, like the calm before a great wave. The wind died completely. Not a single leaf moved. Even the birds, whose morning songs had filled the valley, fell silent. Anna lifted her head. Her small lips parted slightly, as if she, too, felt the sudden stillness. The villagers watched, frozen where they stood. The mist began to thin, and the first rays of sunlight touched the statue's face. Then, slowly, very slowly, something began to change. The dull gray stone seemed to catch the light, glowing softly. At first, they thought it was a trick of the morning sun. But the glow grew brighter, spreading across the statue's veil, her hands, her face, until it seemed as though the Virgin Mary herself was filled with living light. The air felt warm, fragrant, like flowers blooming after rain. Anna's curls shimmered in the glow as she looked up with wide eyes, whispering, "See? She's smiling again." Father Tomas gasped. His rosary slipped from his fingers. The villagers stepped back, some crying, others trembling, unable to speak. Before them, the Virgin's face, once blank and distant, now radiated warmth. Her lips had curved into the gentlest smile, her eyes softened with love. The light spread until it covered Anna completely, wrapping her in a golden radiance. The petals of her flowers glowed as if alive. For a long, breathless moment, the world stood still. Then the light began to fade. The warmth drifted away like a sigh. The wind returned, whispering through the trees. The birds began to sing again, faint, hesitant, as if unsure whether it was safe. And when everything was quiet once more, the Virgin Mary stood exactly as before. But her face was changed. The smile remained. It was no illusion of the sun, no trick of the light. The villagers stared, unable to move or speak. Anna looked up at the statue one last time and smiled back. "Thank you, Mama Mary," she said softly. "Now they believe." No one climbed down the hill for a long time. Even Father Tomas could not find words. He simply knelt in the grass, head bowed, tears streaming down his cheeks. At that moment, every heart on that hill, from the faithful to the doubtful, knew they had seen something beyond reason, beyond doubt. Something that would be remembered forever. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. The air on the hill felt different now, not heavy, but holy. It carried a quiet warmth that sank deep into every heart standing there. Anna remained kneeling in front of the statue, her little hands folded, her eyes fixed on the Virgin's glowing face. To her, it wasn't strange or frightening. It was like seeing an old friend finally smile. Behind her, Father Tomas slowly rose to his feet. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Holy Mother of God." The villagers stood in stunned silence. A few dropped to their knees without even realizing it. Others simply wept, not knowing why. The morning light had fully broken now, but the glow around the statue didn't fade with the sun. It shone from within, gentle, golden, and alive. The Virgin's stone eyes seemed to hold movement, a living light behind them, as if she were truly looking at the child before her. Anna tilted her head, smiling softly. "I told them you smile when I come," she said. Her voice was small, but the hill carried it like a hymn. And then something else happened, something so subtle that those who witnessed it could barely describe it later. The statue's head seemed to incline ever so slightly forward, the way a mother bends to look upon her child. No sound, no thunder, no wind. Only that single, tender motion full of love. The villagers gasped. One woman cried out, "She moved. The Blessed Virgin moved." Father Tomas lifted his trembling hands, tears running freely down his face. "No," he whispered. "She listens." A soft fragrance began to fill the air. It wasn't perfume or incense. It was the scent of living flowers, sweet and pure, though none grew nearby. It spread through the clearing, wrapping everyone in its delicate peace. Even the oak leaves above the statue seemed to glimmer as though touched by unseen light. Every color, the grass, the sky, even the mist, seemed more vivid, more alive. Anna looked around her. "Do you feel it?" she asked gently. Her mother nodded, unable to speak. The light around the Virgin flickered once, then grew stronger, soft pulses like a heartbeat. And then, for one brief instant, it reached outward and touched the faces of those watching. When it faded, the villagers looked at one another in disbelief. Their faces were wet with tears, but not from sorrow. Something inside them, something long asleep, had awakened. Father Tomas took a step forward, falling to his knees beside Anna. "My child," he said softly, "what did she tell you?" Anna looked up at him with wide eyes. "She didn't need to say anything," she whispered. "She already said it with her smile." The priest nodded slowly, understanding more than words could explain. The villagers began to pray quietly at first, then together. Their voices rose like a single breath, trembling but sincere. They prayed not for proof, not for wealth, but for forgiveness for doubting what only a child had believed. Anna stood and placed her tiny hand on the base of the statue. Her fingers brushed the cool stone, still faintly warm from the light. "I'm happy you smiled at them," she said softly. "Now they know you're real." And as she spoke, the Virgin's lips curved just a little more, a smile of such gentle kindness that it made every heart tremble again. The light slowly began to fade. The air cooled, and the fragrance of flowers thinned until only the soft scent of morning remained. The glow withdrew into the stone, leaving the statue as it had always been, yet somehow changed forever. Now her face held that faint smile carved in place, one that had never been there before. Her eyes seemed brighter, her features softened, alive even in stillness. The villagers stayed there for a long time, unwilling to leave. Some sat in silence. Others touched the earth where the light had fallen, as though afraid it might vanish if they turned away. When Father Tomas finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. "We have seen a miracle," he said, "a gift of faith through a child's heart." Anna turned to him, her expression calm and radiant. "She said it's not a gift," Anna whispered. "It's a reminder." "A reminder?" the priest asked gently. Anna nodded. "That she's still listening." The clouds above the valley drifted apart, and sunlight spilled across the fields below. From that height, they could see the rooftops of their village glimmering like silver. Everything looked new, as if the world itself had been quietly washed clean. The villagers slowly made their way down the hill, each carrying something unseen but deeply felt. Their laughter was gone now, replaced by silence and awe. But Anna lingered. She stayed kneeling before the statue a little longer, her head bowed, her tiny hand still resting on the Virgin's robe. When she finally stood, she whispered, "I'll come again tomorrow," as if heaven itself had breathed in reply. When the villagers finally began to move again, the world around them felt strangely quiet. The sound of footsteps on the grass seemed softer than before. Even their breathing came in hushed rhythm, as if they were afraid to break the peace that lingered in the air. The miracle had ended, yet somehow it hadn't. The glow was gone, but its warmth still lived in every heart that had witnessed it. It was as if something invisible had passed through them, a breath, a whisper, a love that words could never capture. Anna stood at the base of the statue, small and motionless, her head tilted upward toward the Virgin's face. The faint smile carved into the stone now looked eternal, unshaken by time or weather. Her mother took a slow step forward, unable to hold back her tears any longer. She dropped to her knees beside her daughter and pulled her close. "Anna, my little one," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we saw it too." Anna's small hands rested against her mother's cheeks, wiping away the tears with her thumbs. "I told you she smiles," she said softly. Her words were simple, but they carried more truth than the priest's longest sermons. Her father stood a few feet away, his rough hands clutching his hat to his chest. He had built barns, plowed fields, and weathered storms his whole life, but he had never felt smaller or more humbled than he did now. He sank to his knees in the wet grass. "I doubted," he whispered. "Forgive me, Lord. Forgive me for laughing at her faith." Father Tomas slowly approached the statue. His knees ached from climbing, and his hands still trembled from what he had seen. He reached out and touched the Virgin's foot, expecting cold stone. Instead, it felt warm gently, impossibly warm, as though the life of heaven still pulsed beneath it. He lowered his head. "Mother of God," he murmured, "how foolish we are to think we must see before we believe." The villagers gathered around him, forming a small circle of silence. Some crossed themselves. Others simply stared, unable to speak. And there, in the middle of that circle, stood the 5-year-old girl, her face calm, her eyes full of quiet light. "She's not angry," Anna said suddenly. Everyone turned toward her. "She's happy. She said thank you." Her voice was small, but it carried across the clearing like a bell. Even Father Tomas could feel the truth in it. He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "What does she thank us for, child?" Anna smiled. "For coming to see her, for believing now." They stayed on the hill until the sun rose higher, washing everything in gold. No one spoke of hunger or work or time. The air itself seemed sacred, filled with something they had never known before, a silence that wasn't empty, but full. When they finally began to walk down, no one led the way. They moved slowly, step by step, as though afraid to turn their backs on what they had seen. At the edge of the path, Father Tomas stopped and looked back one last time. The statue of the Virgin stood in the sunlight, her smile still faint but unmistakable. A breeze stirred the oak leaves above her, and for a heartbeat it almost seemed as if she nodded gently toward them. The priest turned to the people. "Do you understand now?" he asked quietly. One woman pressed her hand to her heart and whispered, "We do."
That evening, when the church bell rang, the entire village gathered for Mass.
The little church had never been so full. No one spoke of the miracle directly, yet everyone knew why they had come. Even the boys who once mocked Anna now knelt at the front pew, heads bowed in shame. Father Tomas spoke softly from the altar. He didn't try to explain what had happened. He simply said, "Sometimes heaven chooses the smallest hands to carry its light." The crowd fell silent. They all turned to look at the tiny figure sitting in the front row, the little girl with the flower basket resting at her feet. Anna felt their eyes, but didn't shrink away. She smiled politely, then looked up at the statue of the Virgin above the altar. The candlelight reflected in her eyes like tiny stars. That night, as she lay in bed, Anna looked out the window toward the dark outline of the hill. It was barely visible beneath the moonlight, but she could still picture it clearly: the tree, the flowers, the smiling face of the Virgin Mary. She whispered softly, "Thank you for smiling at them." And then, in the stillness of her small room, she felt something move gently through her heart, like the echo of the same warmth she had felt that morning. Down in the valley, the village slept peacefully for the first time in years. And up on the hill, bathed in moonlight, the Virgin Mary's stone face seemed to glimmer faintly once more.
Not with bright light, but with a calm that only the faithful could see.
Morning returned to the valley with a new kind of light. It was soft, golden, and seemed to linger longer over the rooftops, as if heaven itself had chosen to rest there. From that day on, the village was never quite the same. The gossip stopped. The laughter that once mocked now turned into quiet prayers. Even the children who used to tease Anna began walking beside her in the mornings, their hands full of flowers picked from the fields. People who had long stopped going to church began to climb the hill again. Some carried candles, others brought their worries and tears. They came to the statue that now smiled down gently at them, a smile that seemed alive no matter the hour or season. And each time someone reached the top, they would find Anna already there. Her little basket beside her, her knees pressed into the grass, her eyes closed in prayer. She still spoke to the Virgin as she always had, softly, as though she were speaking to her own mother. But now she wasn't alone. One afternoon, Father Tomas watched from a distance as a group of villagers climbed the hill behind the girl. Old men who once scoffed at faith now leaned on their canes, whispering prayers. Young mothers carried their babies, pointing to the statue with reverent awe. Even the fields below seemed brighter, the streams clearer, as if creation itself rejoiced quietly with them. When Father Tomas reached the statue, he placed a small wooden plaque at its base. He carved the words himself, slow and careful, with hands that still trembled at the memory of that golden light. It read, "Here the Virgin smiled upon a child's faith, and through her, a village learned to believe again." Seasons changed. The snow came and melted. The meadows turned green once more. Through it all, the statue remained unbroken, unchanging, yet never cold again. On summer mornings, sunlight would touch its face just so, and travelers swore it glowed faintly, like a reflection of the miracle that had once happened there. Flowers grew wild around its base, now daisies, lavender, poppies, the same ones Anna used to bring in her little basket. No one planted them. They simply appeared, blooming faithfully year after year. Some said it was just nature. Others smiled quietly, knowing better. As the years passed, people began to call it the Hill of Faith. Pilgrims came from neighboring towns. They knelt in the grass, prayed in silence, and left small tokens, rosaries, candles, folded notes of gratitude. But for the villagers, the hill was not just a holy place. It was a reminder that miracles don't always thunder from the sky. Sometimes they walk barefoot in the morning mist, carrying a basket of wildflowers. Anna grew a little older, but not much changed about her. Her steps were still light, her smile still gentle, her eyes still full of the same unshakable peace. Every morning before breakfast, she would still make her journey up the hill. One spring dawn, Father Tomas saw her kneeling there again, her dress brushing the flowers. He stood quietly behind her, listening to her soft voice. "Thank you for taking care of everyone," she said to the statue. "Papa doesn't worry anymore. Mama smiles when she prays. Everyone's happy now." She paused for a moment, then added with a giggle, "And the boys don't tease me anymore." The priest smiled behind her, his eyes glistening. He didn't interrupt her prayer. He simply watched as sunlight poured through the branches above, crowning the child and the statue in gold. It looked for a moment like heaven had come down again, not in thunder or fire, but in quiet grace. Years later, when travelers asked the villagers about the story, they would always point to the hill and say, "It happened there. We saw it with our own eyes." And if you asked about the little girl, they would smile and answer, "She still goes every morning. The Virgin still smiles when she comes." Some claimed they saw light on the hill at dawn, faint, gentle, like the glow of a candle seen through fog. Others said they heard the sound of a child's laughter drifting through the fields, long before anyone else was awake. Whether or not they truly did, no one could say for sure. But everyone agreed on one thing: the faith of a single 5-year-old girl had changed them all. The statue of the Virgin Mary still stands on that hill. Her smile remains, calm and welcoming, as if frozen in a moment of divine tenderness.
The oak above her still sways in the wind, and the flowers at her feet never fail to bloom.
And if you ever visit on a quiet morning, when the mist still clings to the grass and the bell rings faintly from the valley, you might see a small figure kneeling there, a girl with a basket, talking softly to her mother in heaven. And in that silence you may feel it too. That gentle warmth, that peace beyond reason. And the truth the villagers once learned the hard way: that heaven is never far. It simply waits for a heart pure enough to see it.